A CBS News investigation reveals changes police departments across the country say they're making to confront possible racial bias. This Friday marks 5 years since the death of Michael Brown. The unarmed black teenager was shot by a white police officer who says Brown attacked him in Ferguson, Missouri. There were months of protests after Brown's death and the grand jury decision not to indict the officer involved. Outrage over similar incidents in other cities led to changes in police training. But is it working? Jeff Pegues begins our multi-part investigation into policing in America 5 years after Ferguson. Jeff, what did you learn?
Well, we reached out to more than 150 departments in big cities nationwide. At least 69% of them told us that they have added training that teaches officers how to manage unconscious biases that we all have, including race. More than half of those departments say that they've added bias training since Ferguson. But when we asked if it works, most say they don't have a way to measure success. Some officers even told us that it's made their jobs tougher. Implicit bias training, has it worked?
No.
You don't think it worked?
The training itself, the content, was the absolute worst training I've ever had.
These are current Mesa, Arizona police officers. They are both white. We agreed to hide their faces and alter their voices so that they can speak freely.
And you have to make a decision like that.
This is their department's implicit bias training.
So there's research that has documented implicit biases, and they've linked it to ethnicity and race as one.
They are taught how to recognize and minimize negative impacts that hidden biases can have on their jobs.
People are inclined to stereotype black individuals as more aggressive.
It's reinforcing the minority of society that has that blanket opinion about Caucasian males. One of the first videos introduced in that training was reaffirming that you're born a victim if you're a minority.
All right, so what do you think the agenda is?
Reinforcing that the police are racist, but specifically the white male police are racist.
To our knowledge, these veteran officers have not been involved in the kinds of high-profile incidents that have divided the community and led to what they see as an overcorrection in new training.
Trying to change what we have done that has worked overwhelmingly effectively. It becomes an officer safety issue, causing officers to second-guess themselves, which is a complete change to when we first started.
Well, there have been some pretty high-profile incidents here. Robert Johnson getting knocked around. Gabriel Ramirez. Officers squeezed his neck after he was handcuffed. Daniel Shaver on his knees begging for his life in a Mesa hotel room. Caught on video.
There is nothing that those officers did that was outside of the training that they had received.
That Robert Johnson video, is that what you're taught to do?
We're taught to handle the situation.
Was that handling the situation, or was that excessive force?
That was handling the situation.
The officers involved in the Ramirez and Johnson cases were not charged with crimes. Officer Philip Brailsford was fired and charged with murdering Daniel Shaver, but was acquitted after a 6-week trial.
Put your hands on the car, I'm gonna shoot you in your head, you understand me?
Similar incidents across the country have prompted calls for police to change their approach. A CBS News survey of departments in America's largest cities reveals part of that response. 75% of departments who completed our survey told us that they changed their training after controversial use of force incidents. 90% of departments who say they have implicit bias training say it is required of all officers. But training methods vary. For example, Honolulu, Hawaii told us that they have 1 half-hour session a year. Raleigh, North Carolina told us that they do at least 8 hours per year.
I want our community to feel safe.
Despite what we heard from those Mesa officers, Chief Ramon Batista told us earlier this year that the new training is working.
I think evidenced by the fact that in the last 9 months, we've reduced use of force-related events by over 30%, points to the fact that we're making progress.
But there is no universal measure of success. Other city departments we surveyed, like New York, say reducing physical altercations between officers and the community doesn't necessarily mean implicit bias training is working.
They judged a book by its cover.
Departments in Hawaii, Oregon, Georgia, and Nebraska told us that they track bias complaints against officers to determine success. But about 59% of departments who responded to our follow-up questions say that they don't have a way to know if implicit bias training is working at all. These officers say some of the new training is just for show.
They start the video with saying, "We are not telling you to do this. We are here to present it."
At the beginning of the session, they say, don't do this, but you got to watch it.
Correct.
It kills morale because to pay for this training, we had to give up something else, right? So instead of doing more firearms training, okay, now we've taken funds from there. So for the officers on the morale, to look at it like, you don't care about me and you don't care about the citizens. You care about putting on this little show.
Mesa PD denies that trainers there tell officers to ignore what they're teaching. As you heard, those officers believe claims of racism among law enforcement are overblown. But what about cops who say more needs to be done? In our next hour, we're going to meet a St. Louis officer who says that she thinks that white supremacists are working on the force.
There's clearly a big divide here still, Jeff.
There is. And I don't know if you could see it in that video, but as I was watching that, maybe you saw my reaction. My eyes sort of pop open when they say it's a show, when they say, we don't do what the trainers tell us to do.
Like, you appreciate the honesty, and obviously they didn't want to show their face, but you look at the Robert Johnson video and you go, he wasn't resisting. That's what you're trained to do. So I'd be curious to know, well, what should it look like?
Yes.
Because I understand they're under an incredible amount of pressure, but the point is the conversation has to happen. And it'd be interesting to hear more about what they think should happen in order to get to the place where everybody's happy.
Well, exactly. And we were, surprised by how candid they were too, and especially over those incidents, because if you talk to police chiefs after incidents like that, they would not say what those officers told us. And that's why we feel that interview was so important, because you rarely hear officers on the beat being that honest.
Yeah.
Well, we're really looking forward to the next part in our next hour. Jeff, thank you.